Today we're going to look at Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery. But first, the author. Shirley Jackson, born on December 14, 1919, and died on August 8, 1965, was an American author who wrote short stories and novels. Her most famous work is her short story, The Lottery, which combines a peaceful small-town American setting with a horrific shock ending. The tone of the most of her works is odd and macabre, with an impending sense of doom, often framed by very ordinary settings and characters. So with her first publication in 1948 in the New Yorker magazine, there were some very wild reactions. The Lottery is reported to have generated more negative letters from readers than any other story previously published by the magazine. Many people actually canceled their subscriptions to the magazine. Readers were offended by the work and its suggestion that evil could be so easily and commonly carried out. They felt the stoning was a pointless, arbitrary, and violent sacrifice. Now, some people actually called to see where the town was so they could actually go and watch the lottery. As a matter of fact, Shirley Jackson herself received over 300 letters that summer alone. I can count only 13 that spoke kindly to me. Even my own mother scolded me. Dad and I did not care at all for your story. It does seem, dear, that this gloomy kind of story is what all you young people think about these days. Why don't you write something to cheer people up? Now, generally, Shirley Jackson refuses to explain the meanings of all of her stories, and specifically for the lottery. But she did once tell a journalist, "I suppose I hoped by setting a particularly brutal rite in the present and in my own village to shock the readers with a graphic demonstration of the pointless violence and the general inhumanity of their own lives. But I gather that in some cases the mind just rebels." The number of people who expected Mrs. Hutchinson to win a Bendix washer at the end would amaze you. Now, this isn't the first time that we've actually seen or heard of things like the lottery happening. Matter of fact, ancient ritual sacrifice was done quite often. In ancient Athens, Greece, Athenians believed that human sacrifice promised fertile crops. Also, by transferring one's sins to persons or animals and then sacrificing them, people believed that their sins would be eliminated, a process that has been termed a scapegoat. And a similar ritual sacrifice occurs with Tessie Hutchinson. This explains the village member's remark, "Lottery in June, corn be heavy soon." So, what is a scapegoat? Well, this is a person, group, or thing that is assigned responsibility for the perceived faults of a given society. The term has many roots in the ancient world. Now, in modern times, the Holocaust is often pointed to as an example of scapegoating, by which 6 million Jews were killed under the direction of Adolf Hitler. Hitler played on a popular sentiment in his country at the time by blaming Jews for the loss of the First World War and the economic woes of Germany. Now remember, The Lottery, the short story by Shirley Jackson, was written in 1948. World War II ends in 1945. And so after World War II, Americans tended to imitate those around them rather than following their own separate paths. Now, encouraging this conformity was the spread of television, which broadcast the same set of images to Americans that were scattered throughout the country. That way, most of America would know what it is they wanted to emulate and how to react. At the same time, in politics, people feared the spread of communism, leading to the Un-American Activities Committee, the Hollywood Blacklist, and by 1950, Joseph McCarthy's communist witch hunt. Now, in this story, the townspeople are swept away by the tide of conformity. The lottery always goes ahead. Now, again, we're looking at the same time period where Shirley Jackson writes The Lottery in 1948. Only 5 years previous, by 1943, news of the Nazi concentration camps had finally reached the American public. A number of Americans responded with horror and concern. that these German communities could have stood by and silently allowed the Holocaust to occur. And yet in her short story, Shirley Jackson hints at a similar situation in her story when townspeople are unable to fully question or to prevent the brutal lottery practice, and in fact, participate in it. Now, the lottery also alludes to the biblical story in which Jesus frees an adulterous woman, directing who is without sin to cast the first stone. So, of course, no one throws stones at her. Unfortunately, no one in the lottery stops this stoning. Tessie becomes their scapegoat. She pays for their sins. We also have the idea of ritual without meaning. Because there's always been a lottery, the villagers feel compelled to continue this horrifying tradition. They focus on its gruesome nature, for they still remember to use stones even after they've forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box. Now, the story may be saying that society tends toward violence instead of society's need for civilized traditions. Now, the horrible actions exhibited in groups, such as the stoning of Mrs. Hutchinson, do not take place on the individual level, for individually, such action would be called murder. Now, on the group level, people may classify their atrocious act simply as ritual. When Mrs. Hutchinson arrives at the ceremony late, she chats sociably with Mrs. Delacroix. But after Mrs. Hutchinson falls victim to the lottery selection, Mrs. Delacroix chooses a stone so large that she must pick it up with both hands. On the individual level, the two women regard each other as friends, but on the group level, they betray that relationship, satisfying the mob-violent mentality. There are a few symbols that we'll notice in Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. One of them is the color black. This usually shows a symbolism for the color of death, the color of mourning, and the color of punishment. Now, the black box used to draw lots and the slip of paper with the black mark pointing out the winner are mentioned too frequently to be coincidental. Now, the black box itself, what could it mean? Could it mean some sort of coffin or some sort of casket-like reference? Is it some evil secret hidden away? And the black spot on the paper, is that supposed to represent a sense of sin? Like a black mark on one's record is negative. Would a black mark mean unclean? We also have the black box itself. Now, the box is old, the paint is peeling, and the wood is splintered. Now, this condition reflects the fading of the tradition in other villages, as well as the villagers' questioning of the lottery itself in this village. However, they don't replace the box, just like they'll not stop the lottery. Now, the lottery itself could serve as a symbol. It symbolizes any number of social problems that we blindly continue through, even though they may be outdated. And what is interesting is the lack of setting. There's no specific name or place. This is any town, USA. The contrast of the town with the ritual itself helps build this suspense. Where this might actually be could be anywhere and at any time. And then maybe perhaps some of the names of the characters themselves could be symbolic. For example, we have Summers. Well, the season of summer is associated with youth, strength, growth, the prime of life and warmth, leisure and prosperity, happiness, the sense of blooming and blossoming. And then we also have the other name, Graves. Well, that would be the obvious idea of a grave, a place of entombment or death. We could also say perhaps the word grave could also equal its adjective. Grave means serious. It hints that the lottery may not be some frivolous contest. Now, critics have said that Jackson creates the balance by having Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves share in the responsibilities of the ritual. Life brings death, and death recycles life. And of course, some people also believe the lottery to be a modern-day parable. A parable is a story that presents a moral lesson through characters who are representative of ideas. Now, the focus in a parable is not to develop character or other typical plot elements. You're not told the lesson in a parable as well. You have to figure out what the lesson is. Well, what could possibly be our lessons? That would be the themes. Acts of violence, hatred, and murder are just not acceptable just because many people participate. Society is reluctant to reject outdated traditions and ideas, rules, laws, and practices, sometimes because we have traditions, we keep holding to them regardless. People are not all good, and people are not all evil, but rather people are a mixture of both. Now, horrifying acts of violence can take place anywhere and at any time, and they can be committed by the most ordinary of people. Following the crowd can have disastrous consequences. The unexamined life is not worth living. And then, of course, your own themes may apply as well. Thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. I hope you enjoyed Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. If you'd like to learn more about Shirley Jackson's The Lottery or maybe some other short stories, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what else I can do for you. And as always, if you could subscribe, I'd appreciate it.